I'm James Lynch, and this is my stock report for UFC 301, taking a look at the biggest winners and losers from the event. And the thumbnail always gives it away. You know who my biggest stock riser on this card was. That would be Anthony Smith, who going into this fight, and again, we always looked at optics here when it comes to the stock report going in. Anthony Smith was a big underdog going into this fight. There was a lot of people who wrote him off. And if you watch my preview show on Monday, we do the preview show every Monday on this channel. I talked about the odds being way off here. Look, I did pick Petrino to get this done just because of the youth, but Anthony Smith should not be plus 400 or shouldn't have been going into this fight, because if you look at who he's fighting some of the top guys in the weight class. He did get finished by Khalil Roundtree in the fight previous to this, but I don't think there was too much evidence that Smith is on some like major decline throughout the rest of his career. And he proved that here on Saturday, getting the first round finish over Petrino. I think Smith by submission was something like plus 1,200. Those odds were just a little bit too crazy for me. And if you even look previously in the 205-pound division, Anthony Smith is a pretty tough guy to take out. Roundtree was a third round finish. Glover Teixeira finished him late. Rakic couldn't finish him. Smith is not an easy guy to take out. And that was pretty much one of the only ways that Petrino was going to get this done was by a first round stoppage, and he just didn't fight the opposition that warranted him being minus 550 in my opinion. So Smith going out there proving his doubters wrong. And again, I want to remind people, you may not like certain fighters, but don't let that blind them to the actual fight, because I think this fight was a lot closer, like I said, going in, and Smith proved that by getting the win here on Saturday night. So Anthony Smith, big winner there. We'll see where he goes from here, but it's nice to see him get back in the win column here, winner of 2 of his last 3, and we'll see where he goes from there after that big win. So Anthony Smith, my big winner on UFC 301. Another big winner on this card was a guy that was favored very heavily, but you got to look at who he fought and just the way he did it, and that was Borahio getting it done over Paul Craig, getting the second round TKO victory over Craig. Very impressive. This is a guy that continues to get big wins. He finished Abus the GOAT prior to that, Olashaychuk. He's looked outstanding, and look, he's been criticized a lot throughout his career, his early career, I should say, about him being boring. If you're going out there and finishing guys, that is the type of wins that are going to take notice in the division here. Again, I know he was heavily favored, and we don't look at that too much when it comes to the stock report, because again, he was expected to win. It's just the fact that he went out there and he knocked out Paul Craig and took care of business in this one. So Borahio, again, a big winner here on this card. And with his win streak, he's a guy that's going to be making a lot of noise in this division pretty soon here. I think, again, we heard Dolidze's maybe out of his fight. We heard that Anthony Hernandez is out of the fight with Dolidze. I don't know if that's too quick of a turnaround, but Borahio, a lot of potential here, just 31 years old, taking out Paul Craig at UFC 301. So that was very impressive. And then the other one we got to bring up, and again, people might disagree with this, but I thought Pantoja getting the win here. Now look, the fight was close, maybe closer than it needed to be, but Pantoja getting another win here. That's 3 straight wins, well, I guess he won the title over Moreno, so that's the second straight title defense there for Pantoja in a fight against Steve Erceg, where Erceg really had nothing to lose here. He only had 3 UFC fights, maybe not deserved this opportunity. So it was very high risk here for Pantoja to do this in Brazil. And, his stock did go up because, again, it's another title defense for him. And we're sitting here wondering who is going to be able to dethrone Alexander Pantoja. Not to mention the fact, I saw a lot of people picking Erceg in this fight. And, I can understand why after watching this fight, because it was very close. But I think as far as Erceg finishing Pantoja, I never really thought that was an option. Pantoja's never been stopped in his career, and he's fought far better opposition. Pantoja has got to get a mention here as far as a stock riser, because, again, he was the main event. This was in Brazil. Title holder, all that stuff. His stock definitely went up on this card. So Alexander Pantoja is going to get a mention here too. Now, as we always do, let's do some honorable mentions. And I think this is the most honorable mentions I've ever had on a UFC card, but there's so many that we have to mention. So honorable mention for me, got to mention Steve Erceg. Look, he didn't win the fight, but he showed that he is a top contender in this weight class by, winning a few rounds against Pantoja. It was close. I don't think Erceg did enough to win, but I thought his performance was certainly one that deserves accolades, and definitely showed that he is at the top of the weight class there. So again, just a second loss. He'll definitely, learn from this. Maybe next time if they have the rematch, he can have it in Australia. But yeah, listen, he did lose the fight, but Steve Erceg's got to get some props here. His stock certainly went up after UFC 301. We got to mention Jose Aldo. Now, part of the reason Aldo wasn't on this, on the top 3 list was because of the optics of this, because Aldo, he's basically, my understanding is he just took this fight to fight out his contract, and he's going to go do other stuff. So his stock did go up, but in the grand scheme of things, Aldo's not really, most likely he's not going to return to the UFC and fight in the bantamweight division. So his stock doesn't really mean a whole lot, but look, huge win for him there. First MMA fight in a couple years. He finishes a really dangerous guy in Jonathan Martinez. He was the underdog in this fight. You got to give Aldo his credit here in this one. And, you know, again, he proved me wrong. He proved a lot of people wrong coming back after such a long layoff and getting it done. Because I'll be honest, I was not that impressed with some of the boxing stuff I saw since the UFC. I thought Martinez, very good opportunity for him to move ahead, and he falls short. And listen, Aldo, in my opinion, won every round in this fight. Looked great. Aldo's got to get an honorable mention just for the simple fact that, you know, underdog coming through. We got to talk about Michel Pereira as an honorable mention as well. Again, expected. I mean, who here picked, you know, Ihor in this fight? I don't think anyone really did. Most people felt it was going to be Pereira inside the distance. I took that. I also took the under in this fight. And, you know, Pereira, you know, he looked great, but this was sort of an expected win for him. But we do have to mention it because every time he keeps getting a highlight reel finish, like in this case, 54-second standing guillotine choke, you got to mention it because, again, that looks good on the highlight reel. Joe Anderson Brito, I thought looked great against Jack Shore. Got to give him his props. He's been quietly making a good win streak here at 145. Drakkar Klose, again, very, very close odds going into this one. Klose, you know, losing that third round, but the first two rounds certainly won. Got to give the American credit for going into Brazil and taking out a tough guy in Joaquim Silva. Can we get Drakkar Klose a ranked opponent now? How many wins is that? That's 4 in a row, 7 of 8. And his only loss was to Dariush in a fight where he actually rocked Dariush in that fight too. So Drakkar Klose, I know he's older. I know he's kind of been forgotten in the lightweight division in terms of, you know, guys that are like major players here, but he needs to step up and he definitely needs a ranked opponent next. So very, very big win there for Drakkar Klose. And then opening up the card, we had 2 really good fights. Let's start first with Alessandro Costa taking out Borges. Should have never been this low of a favorite. In my opinion, you should have been closer to like minus 300. Costa made it look easy. Really big win for him there in the flyweight division. And then got to mention Ruffy. What a finish that was over Jamie Malarkey, who I think is probably going to get cut at this point. But Ruffy, a guy to keep an eye on in the weight class. Very exciting guy. And obviously his stock went up for sure. So those are some of the stock risers. Let's talk about some of the stock droppers on this card. And you saw it there in the thumbnail. Victor Petrino, you're in Brazil. You're a big favorite. You're 26 years old. You're not even 30. What am I talking about? And you get finished in the first round. That's a bad look. That looked to me in that fight, and I know it was quick, it looked to me like, hey, this guy's not even anywhere close to being a world beater in this weight class. Because listen, I didn't think he'd finish Anthony Smith, but you got to get out of the first round, and, you know, sort of leaned into that guillotine choke. It was pretty, pretty crazy. And again, we got to look at opposition, guys. This was a perfect example of this going into the fight. He's a minus 500 favorite for beating who? The Pleasure Man, who's not in the UFC. Petrino, who's, I think, still in the UFC, but not doing that great. Pedro, who retired. And Bukauskas, who's not even, well, he's in the UFC, but not doing so great. So, yeah, I mean, again, I think there's a little bit of an overhype with this guy. 26, plenty of time to grow. Obviously, it's an older weight class for sure. But yeah, had he won this fight, his stock would have gone through the roof because Smith's, been in the mix for the title for quite some time, or at least been a highly ranked light heavyweight. And here he is getting finished in the first round. So back to the drawing board for Petrino. But to me, he was the biggest stock dropper on this card. Also got to talk about Jonathan Martinez. Again, he was favored here. Now, yes, he had to go to Brazil and fight the king of Brazil, but still, missed opportunity here for Martinez. He beats a Jose Aldo. We're starting to talk about him getting big fights at 135, and that doesn't happen here. Martinez losing. I could see if this fight was a bit closer, but again, I don't think Martinez won any of the rounds. I thought this was all Aldo. Martinez back to the drawing board for him. His stock certainly went down just because of, if he had won this fight, his stock would have, again, like Petrino's, gone out the roof, blown off the roof, I should say, as far as analogies there, getting it done. So Martinez, very big win from there. Then the other one, and look, and I know he was a big underdog in this fight, but Paul Craig, you think at one point this guy had, he still has wins over Ankalaev and Jamal Hill, 36 years old, 2 straight stoppage losses. This is a huge stock dropper for Paul Craig. At this point, Paul Craig has got to be the guy that you give Contender Series winners to build them up if he still wants to stick around. Or maybe the UFC cuts ties with him here pretty soon. But you look at the drop to middleweight now 1-3 in the weight class. He also had a couple losses there to Johnny Walker and Volkan Ozdemir. Also has a win over Krylov as well. Like, it's too bad because Craig has some really good wins, but his losses would have really put him behind the 8 ball there. I'm a big Paul Craig fan. I like watching him fight, but this was another tough outing for him getting finished once again. So Paul Craig, another big stock dropper on this card. And then one honorable mention I'll mention as far as a stock dropper has got to be Jack Shore. Now look, he was an underdog going into this fight, but you look at where Jack Shore was a couple fights ago, right? Had a really, really good win over Tamir, had the win over Tamir Valiev. I shouldn't say a really good win, but that was, I know Valiev's not in the UFC, but people thinking, okay, he can do something here. Gets finished by Ricky Simone. beats Amir Khan, who's not in the UFC anymore, and then now loses to Brito. Like, what do you do here with Jack Shore? I think all of his wins now are against guys that aren't in the UFC anymore. So yeah, not good. I know he's 29, but you know, this was a fight that I didn't think was competitive, and I also thought the odds were a little bit too low there on Brito, who went out there and looked more like a minus 300 favorite than whatever he ended up being. I think it was a minus, what did we have here? Minus 200. So yeah, I think he could have been a little bit higher on this one. So those are my biggest. So just a quick recap here. We're going to go over the stock report here. Big winners: Anthony Smith, Borrahio, Alexander Pantoja. Bunch of honorable mentions we don't need to go through. Biggest stock droppers: Petrino, Jonathan Martinez, Paul Craig, and honorable mention to Jack Shore. I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Apologies again for my voice not being 100%. It's going to happen when got a bunch of other stuff going on outside of my interviews. But let me know your top 3 stock risers, your top 3 stock droppers. Would love to hear from you. Would also like to hear your honorable mentions as well. We do the stock report here after every event on this channel. My name is James Lynch. Make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. Really does help out the channel a ton. I'm James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.